Okay, welcome back to the second part of the recording. Now we're moving into sections 1 through 4, and that's pages 14 through 28 of our book if you got the correct edition. So now we're going to talk more specifically about art. Just remember that basically every line that Nietzsche says about art, he's trying to say something about life in general and about finding significance and meaning in your day-to-day life. So he really does want to tell you what he thinks happens in the play Oedipus Rex, for instance. But why he's analyzing that play is because he thinks that artwork, or at least certain artworks, show us something about the significance of life in general. And a related point is this. Nietzsche thinks that one of the best ways to give meaning to life, one of the best ways to make life seem good and worth living, is through artworks. So like I said, Nietzsche is sometimes dark and light, positive and negative in the same idea. Nietzsche thinks, and we'll see this in section 3, where he talks about the wisdom of Silenus, the wisdom of Silenus in section 3. He thinks that human life doesn't have a built-in meaning. It doesn't have a built-in purpose. And he says, but, that's the dark side. But, he says, but you can give it a meaning or purpose. So Nietzsche thinks part of what it means to be a human being is that we're in search of a meaning. We're in search of what's good, and we're in search of a significance to our life. Now, what's it mean to be searching for something? It means you don't have it yet, right? It's not given to you already. But when you're searching for something, there's also the possibility that you will eventually find it. Or more strictly for Nietzsche, you'll create it at a certain point. So that's just what it means to be human for Nietzsche. We're born into this world tiny and weak, and babies can't even see properly yet, and it's loud and confusing, and they don't understand anything, and it takes like 2 years before they can even start talking, right? You can't even walk for a while, right? And Nietzsche says, that's the way it is. We're out of place in this world. We live in this world, but we can't really make sense of it. It's like we're aliens in our own world. We don't quite fit in to our own lives. So we search for a way to fit in, right? We search to find our own unique place in the universe, in the world. And we can do that. That's the thing. So that the dark side of Nietzsche is that we're born confused, weak, all this stuff with no meaning given to us, no real reason to go on. But we can create one, and then we have one. And Nietzsche says art is one of the best ways to create a meaning. Art is one of the best ways to show people what is good and redeemable about the world. Art is one of the best ways to make meaning out of a confusing, meaningless world. Art basically is like our safe space, or like our hearth, right? Like the fireplace that we can cuddle around in the dark night. And that's why we can get through the dark night, okay? Because we have something to cling to. So Nietzsche will say, it's no coincidence if you look around. Every culture has some version of art, okay? Even cultures that don't know how to make many tools, may not have a written language, right? Have no real technology to speak of. They still have songs. They still have their version of literature, which is like stories that they tell about the creation of the earth and about the animals around them, right? They tell stories. They have music. They decorate their clothing, right? So Nietzsche says all of us are born into the world naked and confused and weak. But all cultures then find a way to have strength together. They find a meaning. They create a place for themselves in the world. And they do that through stories and artwork in general. So you see, art is pretty darn important. It gives people a reason to live. Or another way to put the similar point is it helps us make meaning out of the meaningless world. Think about almost all artwork, right? It's about people. And there's always some sort of moral or point to the story. And that point is like, here's your meaning. You didn't have it before the story, now you have it. So, the major point of Nietzsche's in today's portion of the reading is that in ancient Greek art, they had two basic forces that showed up in their artwork. One is identified with Apollo. The other one's identified with Dionysius. Now, the ancient Greeks had gods, right? Gods in the plural. They had Zeus and Apollo and Athena, right? They had a whole bunch of gods. What Nietzsche's talking, though, he's not talking about ancient Greek religion here. Not really. What he's saying is every culture has to make meanings for itself, has to explain what the world is like. It has to justify why we should be here and why we should get out of bed in the morning. The way that the ancient Greeks did it is basically two of their gods fit the bill really well. Two of their gods happen to be really well suited to expressing key fundamental truths about what it means to be in human life and gave basic reasons for why life is good. So he's not really talking about the god Apollo here. What he's saying is that in life in general, and clearly visible in Greek art, there are two main forces in the universe. They are both what the world is and what the world should be. We can sum up one group of these forces under the name Apollo. I'll tell you what that means more in a second. We can sum up this other cluster of things that are related to each other under the name Dionysius. But that's why so often Nietzsche says Apolline, Apolline, and Dionysiac, with an IAC at the end. Because he's talking about like the point of those gods, not the gods themselves. He's talking about the point of those ways of doing art and not some, temple to the god somewhere. So once more, just to rephrase this, is that Nietzsche thinks that there's different aspects of the universe, or different ways that the universe is. One of those we could sum up as being like Apollo. Another one we can sum up as being like Dionysus. So the very world is like this. The entire universe and world itself expresses itself or sort of shows up, sometimes looking like Apollo, sometimes looking like Dionysus. So the whole world is like that. But human life is like that too, because we're part of the universe, part of the cosmos. So what that means is when we look out into the world, we sometimes see aspects of ourselves. In the way that nature's constantly, perpetually making more stuff, well, human beings constantly, perpetually make more stuff. When we see an earthquake or a volcano sort of punch a hole in the world, well, human beings do that too. We also destroy stuff. So the universe is constantly making and destroying, making things beautiful, then making them ugly, giving a form to things, like most oak trees look pretty much the same, and then also disfiguring or deforming things. Well, from a distance, all the trees look the same, and one day that tree's going to fall down and lose its oak form, become dust again. Well, we do that kind of stuff too. So artwork is this weird thing, Nietzsche thinks. It allows us to see ourselves and what human beings do. It allows us to see the universe too, how it works. And by showing us how we are and are not like the rest of the universe, it gives us a meaning to our little spot here on Earth within the larger cosmos. Right? So once more, Art talks about what human beings are and what the world is at the same time. It shows us how we're like the rest of the universe and the world. It shows us how we're different from the rest of the universe and the world. And that combination of how we're like the world and how we're unlike the world shows us our unique place within the world, our little spot and place within the cosmos. So, one of the ways the universe acts is associated with Apollo. So Apollo is the sun god, so he's associated with daylight, where things are visible, where they show up clearly. He's also, he was the most handsome god, right? So he's associated with beauty and a sort of too good to be real perfection. He's also a pretty serene, calm, and sober guy. So he's all about measure and limit. And he's very reserved, right? So then you have Apollo as sort of like a fashion model, right? He's beautiful, and he just stands in the back of the room and looks around. He's not talking a lot. He's not making a lot of friends at the party. He's just sitting there, right? Taking it all in. So Apollo is the god of images, of painting. He's also the god of sculpture. So think about how painting and sculpture work, right? For paintings, for you to be able to see what's in the painting, there has to be sort of a line between different objects. Often the painter will actually paint a line, like where the arm is, they'll paint sort of a black line where the arm is. Even when they don't do that, though, the different colors, the sort of flesh colors of the arm, and say the blue color of the ocean behind it, the contrast, the difference between those is what makes the arm visible. It makes the arm stand out from the blue background, right? Okay, that's how Apollo does stuff, is he carves up the world into different compartments, right? You've got arm over here, you've got ocean over here, there's a tree over there in the background. Sculpture is even more clearly this way, because the sculpture as an artwork, it literally stops, right? It's not even a line. It's like the marble comes to a halt completely, and then the world, the not sculpture, is what's around it. So sculpture is all about lines, about division, about having everything in its proper right place. Okay, so Apollo is the god of what Nietzsche says individuation. All he means by that is an individual carved out into its own place, right? Standing distinctly by itself, differentiated from the rest of the world. Okay? The ancient Greeks also associated Apollo with dreams. So he was the soothsayer god, and that's like fortune telling or reading dreams to predict the future. So what this means is that Apollo was supposed to be the one who generated your dreams. And things about how dreams are. Okay, first of all, dreams are not real. Right? So Apollo's the god of the not real. He's the god of the dream instead of the day-to-day waking life. Think also about how dreams are. Dreams are sort of, when you wake up, they don't make sense. But in the moment, doesn't everything in the dream seem sort of just perfect most of the time? Right? Think about how in a dream stuff that doesn't really make sense, like you're at work and then you turn the corner and all of a sudden you're at home. Well, in the dream it flows pretty smoothly, right? It all just sort of clicks and makes sense in the dream. Yes, when you wake up you realize it's not true and that it didn't make any sense. But in the moment of the dream, it sort of works, right? Okay. So remember, these are things that the ancient Greeks said about this guy Apollo. That's not our main point. Our main point is that this is a whole way of doing artwork. Artwork that's too beautiful to be realistic. Artwork where it's like everything's crystal clear. There's no distracting little details. Artwork which is deliberately illusory or making a sort of an illusion for you. And of course, literally painting and sculpture, these images. Okay, all that stuff is associated with Apollo. Beauty, perfection, illusion, sculpture, painting, and the individual. Okay, so that's one major force in the world that also shows up in human beings and shows up in artwork. Here's another major force that shows up in the universe, in human beings, and in artwork again. This one's Dionysius. Okay, so remember I said Apollo is sober and he's reserved. Dionysius is not. Dionysius is like Chris Farley or Belushi. He's the wild man, right? He's your fraternity brother who doesn't just get drunk, but he stands on the table and tries to do a backflip. Okay? That's Dionysius. He is intoxicated, literally intoxicated. He's the god of wine. Also more metaphorically intoxicated, just sort of like in love with the world, throwing himself around. Okay? Dionysius is associated with the artwork of music. Dionysius is also all about confusion. So remember, Apollo likes to make things clear. In a painting that's like Apollo, the human body will be over here all by itself. Separate from it, behind it, will be a tree, right? Everything clear in its right place, separated and distinct. But that's not Apollo. Okay? Apollo's the one who mixes everything together. Confusion literally means when you fuse together different things that should be distinct. Dionysus mixes them all up. So Dionysus is the god that's all about the loss of certainty and that sort of joyful bliss when you just let things go. Right? Where Apollo is calm and all about measure and limit and being reserved, Dionysus is intense and overwhelming. One way to just sum up what Dionysus is he's a lust for life, is what Nietzsche says. So Dionysus is the god of bringing people together, mixing things that are normally distinct, combining things, and about making you have a sort of ecstatic, transcendent connection to other things. So dance and music are the arts that are associated with Dionysus. So Apollo, that's you at the art museum with your hands clasped behind your back, which is how people always stand at art museums, gazing thoughtfully, nodding, saying, yes, I get it. I get what the artist is doing. Dionysus is you at Burning Man or Coachella or some, rock show, or you're listening to Skrillex cranked up to like 11 at a club or whatever. That's Dionysus. You're dancing with other people. There's just a mixture of bodies. You're probably even touching strangers when you're dancing to dance music, right? You might be high on something or drunk. And even if you're not, you still have that sense of intoxication of being in a group. That's Dionysus. Now remember, Nietzsche says these are forces that are just in the world. Think about a stormy ocean sea. You can't tell where the storm stops and the ocean begins. Right? It's all swirled together. You look out in the cosmos, you don't see individual planets and stars, you just see darkness and lightness mixed together. But also in life, you look out at the world and it's Apollo. That's a stop sign. I know what it means. I can tell where it is. It's on the other side of the street. Right? And that you feel like you are, in general, separate from the world. Right? So these are forces that show up in our lives and in artwork, but here's the kicker. This is important and it's easy to miss. Nietzsche thinks Apollo is great. He thinks Dionysus is great. And he thinks they're both in the world, in humans, and in artwork. The best artworks, and therefore the best lives, the best human lives, are going to resemble the universe. That is, the best human lives and the best artworks have Apollo and Dionysus together. Okay? So most people think Nietzsche has a pretty strong preference for Dionysius. Maybe he does. But strictly, he says you need Apollo in life too. And the best life will have some Apollo and some Dionysus. So don't think that Nietzsche only likes Dionysus. You have to have Apollo as well. That's the first point. The second point is that having both is better. You want to have both in life. So Nietzsche gave a lot more detail, but I'm not going to sit here and read out loud to you all the lines that you've just read yourself. That's the summary of Apollo and Dionysus. So now you get to do something pretty fun. You get to talk about artwork and music and movies and TV shows that you like. Because my question here is pretty simple. Give me examples of artwork that you think show either Apollo or Dionysus or both. Okay? Just give us examples of artwork, the whole world of artwork. Plays, dance, music, sculpture, whatever. Painting, all of it. Okay? That you think show clearly what he means by Apollo. Show ones that you think give us examples of Dionysus. And you can find some that have both, so much the better. So that's sort of section 1 in a nutshell. It also jumps ahead to a few future points, but that's section 1 in a nutshell. What's Apollo? What's Dionysus? Okay. Section 2 is like, okay, what's the artist? The artist is that person who's an imitator of these universe cosmological forces. The artist is the one who sees Apollo stuff in the world and then recreates it in art. The one who sees Dionysus type things in the world and reproduces them in art. Okay, the true artist is of both dream and intoxication at once, Nietzsche says. That's page 19. So, Nietzsche says, if you look at ancient Greek art, we're still talking about it today. We're still mimicking it today. You've probably had to read not only Shakespeare, who's not ancient Greek, but also someone like Sophocles. If you've ever heard of Oedipus Rex, that play, you probably read it. You very well may have read it in school. That's Sophocles. Okay. The reason you know about these ancient Greek gods is because the stories, which are artwork, told about them have lived on throughout the ages. And you've heard of Homer, right? The movie Troy, that's based on the Iliad, which is a work by Homer. Okay. You've heard of the Odyssey, right? And lots of movies like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? That Coen Brothers movie. They take the basic story from Homer in ancient Greek, his story, the Odyssey, and they adapt it for today. So we're still imitating the Greeks. They imitated the universe itself, and we imitate them. Nietzsche's basic point here is the Greeks were onto something in their artwork. Nietzsche says that the average Greek person had the soul of an artist. In our culture, maybe it's 1 in 100 people are artists. And he says there it's like 99 out of 100 people had the artistic sensitivity required to make art. Even if they didn't, it was in them. So Nietzsche's like, their culture just got it. Their culture was sensitive to these things. Now this is what he thinks. He says if you can tap into that same kind of attunement or awareness or sensitivity to what's going on in the world and how it shows up in art, then you'll be like the Greeks were. Right? They were a powerful culture. They were interesting. We're still talking about them today. Because they tapped into something true, something real. And they did that through art. Another main part is this of section 2. This is pages 20 and 21. Apollo and Dionysus are very different. They're not exactly opposites, but basically, yeah, they're opposites. Or we could put it this way. They're definitely opposed because they're so different. But they're not opposites in the sense of like 3 and -3 are opposites, or total darkness and total light are opposites. The way I like to think of them is it's like sibling rivalry. They're both gods, right? They both want to sort of be like the one you pay attention to in artwork. So it's sometimes Dionysus art will be like right at the forefront. And then that sort of gets pushed back by a more Apollo style of artwork. And Nietzsche says that's what explains art history. That's why you've got Renaissance painting, and then it gives way to like 18th century Romanticism, right? And then that gives way. What would come next to like realism, like things like Dickens, right? Very realistic literature. And then you've got abstract art that follows that, right? So that's what Nietzsche thinks explains all of world history. This push-pull between order, which is Apollo, and chaos, which is Dionysus. Between the individual, Apollo, and the group or world itself, which is Dionysus. Between building things up and tearing them down. Again, Apollo, then Dionysus. And it's just that back and forth. We build, then we destroy, then we build again, then we destroy again. We make things beautiful, then we make them ugly, then we make them beautiful again. That's what explains why art changes over the years and why the world itself changes over time. So Apollo and Dionysus are sibling rivalry. Neither one's ever going to get permanently on top, and they're always going to sort of battle, but also they're siblings, right? They're brothers, and they're doing the same basic kind of work, which is expressing in art what it means to be a human being in the world. Okay, section 3 is going to be difficult for some of you. And in the discussion, I'll probably end up pushing back pretty intensely on some of you. So please don't take that personally. It won't be me doing it because of anything specific about your own views. But Nietzsche says here, look, the Greeks were onto a lot of things. One of the things that they understood is that life does not inherently have any meaning whatsoever. Then they also understood, well, so what? Just make a meaning. Just because you weren't given a meaning doesn't mean you can't make one. Now, a lot of you will say, no, darn it, there is a meaning to life. There's God or family or nation or truth or love. Or you'll say, sort of a hard answer to escape today, but you say, well, there's a meaning, but everyone makes their own meaning. So whatever answer you give, I'll try to be like Nietzsche and say, no, wait a second. So let me specify a little more what Nietzsche means here. Okay, when he says there's no meaning given to you, he doesn't mean that every person thinks there's no meaning. Okay. Also, when he says there's no meaning given, he still thinks you can come to value things and give them a meaning. But what he says is that's a choice you make. You let that thing become valuable to you. So if you say family is valuable, it's not because like inscribed in stone somewhere or like at the heart of the sun, right? There's like a tablet that says family is important. And it's not because you learned somewhere that like, oh, that's just how it is. 2 and 2 is 4, family equals good. It's that you wanted to value your family. You came to that conclusion and you gave that value to your family yourself. So Nietzsche's point is this, is values aren't there from the day you're born. You come to them later. So there's value and there's meaning and there's significance in the world, Nietzsche says. But it wasn't that meaning was out there waiting for us and then you learned it at some point. It's a choice that you made. So what that means also is that you could choose to value other things. You could change your mind, basically. So here's the thing. Nietzsche's pretty tricky. When I say, hey, he says there's no built-in meaning to life, right? And you say, yeah, there is. Everyone picks their own meaning. You're actually sort of agreeing with him. So for those of you who think that there's just opinions and no capital T truth, Nietzsche's your boy. For those of you who think, too, about ethical questions or questions of value, that everyone's going to disagree because everyone chooses what is valuable for their own selves, Nietzsche's your boy. You're going to agree with him. But, as I said before, he goes farther than that. So we see this on page 23. And this is what's called the Wisdom of Silenus. It's an important part of this book. Once more, it's based on an ancient Greek story, that is art, a myth, where King Midas, the guy who touched everything and turned it to gold, before that happened, he was hunting for basically like a fairy or like a wood nymph sprite thing named Silenus. Okay? And he says, and the whole point is if you catch this creature, it'll tell you the truth, right? So you can ask it a secret and it'll tell you a secret. And King Midas basically says, what's the best thing for human beings? I want to live the best life. What's the best thing? And what Silenus says, he says, the best thing for you all is to not to live at all. To be nothing. But here you are, you're already alive, so you can't even get the best thing in life. The second best thing for you would be to die soon. Wah, wah. Right? Like sad trumpet. Okay, that sounds really bad. This is what Nietzsche means by it, though. He says, if you're just objective and you look at it, there is no guaranteed reason why you have to do anything. There's no guaranteed reason why anything would be good to all people. But what that follows up with is the optimistic side of that. Okay, so the dark side is, as Nietzsche says on 23, the terror and horror of existence. You're born into this world, you don't understand how it works, you don't know what you want, you don't know when you're going to die, you don't know who to believe and who to trust. So what's best is, well, not this, not the way it is. So for everything we value, there's a reason to value it, there's a reason to say it's good, and there's reasons not to value it, reasons to say it's bad. Or at least not good. And like I said, that's what I'll push back in the discussions is you guys will put forward things where you think they're good. And it's not me saying they're not good, but just showing you that Nietzsche's onto something, is that even though you value them because you have reasons to, you easily could have different reasons and value something else. Or have different reasons and devalue, say these things are bad. Right? People say family, but then they also think, well, you get all your neuroses and bad personality traits from your family. And so here's the art-specific twist. The Greeks basically stared into the abyss, and it stared back. Right? That's a quote that's always associated with Nietzsche. If you stare too long into the abyss stares back. And Nietzsche says if you look too closely at life to try to find its meaning, you'll recognize it doesn't have a built-in automatic meaning. Okay, no problem. Life did not also did not come with built-in iPhones or computers or cars. Human beings made them. Right? Human beings were not born in this world with hammers. We made them. So if life doesn't come with a meaning, no problem. Make one. That's what art is. And that's what the Greeks did. They told a story about Silenus that says explicitly, life has no meaning, there's no reason to be alive rather than dead. And then instead of crumpling and giving up, which would be like the weak baby option, they said, no big deal, we'll just create meaning. And they made all these myths that you still read. They made all these epic poems, which is Homer, that we still remake and make movies out of. They made artwork that we still copy today. They made architecture that still is mimicked in our own capital, Washington, D.C. That's called neoclassical, mimicking classical Greek and Roman architecture. We still stage plays by the ancient Greeks. So Nietzsche thinks if you actually look at how meaningless life is, that there's no value that you have to value. You can crumple and give up. But he says there's no reason to do that. just as much an option as to say, fine, I'll make some meanings. And that is what all artwork is. It's also, Nietzsche says, what all religion is. So I said before that every culture has some form of art, usually music, decorative clothing, etc. Or they have stories and music and decorative clothing. Almost every group of people also has a religion. So why are there so many different religions? Same reason there's so many different kinds of art. You have to make it up from scratch. But art and religion both try to tell you what a human being is, what our place in the world is, and try to give you some reason for living rather than giving up. Art and religion both say, don't give up just because this life is tough. Don't give up just because this world is confusing. Make a meaning to work with the confusion. Make a reason to move forward rather than crumpling and staying still. So that's why Nietzsche says on page 25, oh, the world's a dream, it's a confusing illusion. I'll dream on then. Oh, the world does not have built-in meanings, then call me the meaning maker. That's what I'll do. You have to own your situation in the world, right? So Nietzsche thinks life is made worth living when you both acknowledge what the world is and you sort of fight and go against it at the same time. So that's all this language. He says, existence has no built-in meaning, but it can be worth attaining. You can attain a meaning. He says it's not simple. You have to overthrow what came before you, slay monsters, employ delusions and illusions, and then you'll gain victory over the abyss, right? You have to achieve a life worth living. So I bet some of you will not like that, the comparison of art to religion. Basically, Nietzsche thinks that both are forms of myth, where you make up a story that ascribes some sort of meaning to human existence in the world. But he says, well, compare them, right? It's no coincidence that we quote some of the lines from the Bible. I did it earlier. If thine eye offend you, pluck it out. Because they sound cool, right? They have a meaning, but also they sound good in the same way that poetry sounds good, right? That there's so many images in the religious text. There's always a symbol, right? The apple is the symbol of temptation. The snake is the symbol of gross things we don't like, right? Things that slither and are hard to see. He says, the Bible is a story. The ancient Hindu texts about Hinduism, they're a story. The reason we have all these paintings of Christ crucified, because painting is art and myth, and religions are art and myth. Now, I know a lot of you aren't going to like the sound of that. But one, that's what Nietzsche says. Two, is think about this. What he's saying there is that it doesn't matter if religion is true or false. He has no interest in saying, oh, Christ was never crucified, or God's impossible. He has no interest in that kind of stuff. He has zero interest in saying whether any religion is true or false. His only point is this, he says, religion gives people meaning. It gives them a reason to get out of bed in the morning. It gives them a story, no more true, but no less true than any other story, that lets them make some sense out of this crazy world. So why is there something rather than nothing? Christianity gives you an answer to that. It gives you a story about that. Why is this world so difficult and hard to live in? It gives you a story about that. It gives you an answer. And you need an answer, right? You need an answer. I need an answer. Hindus need an answer. Muslims need an answer. We just all have slightly different answers. So it sounds bad because it sounds like he's saying religion isn't true. But remember, art isn't true either. And Nietzsche loves art Not even in spite of it not being true, but because it's not true. Right? Stories are better than the truth. Let's put it this way. Would you rather see like a story of, say, the O.J. Simpson trial, or actually watch the whole darn trial? The trial was boring, trust me. I was alive when it was happening. The story about the trial, though, is great entertainment. Okay? So that's what Nietzsche says. It's not a problem that religion resembles art. In fact, it's one of its strengths. Because like art, religion gives people a reason. It gives them some sense of what they are in the world, what they should do, what they shouldn't. We need that. One final point, though. Okay, so I sort of gave you something there if you don't like what Nietzsche says about religion. Now I'm going to take something back a little bit. Okay? So religion's good because it gives people a reason to live. But some artwork is better than other artwork, right? Nietzsche says some religions are better than other religions. This is what Nietzsche says. Life is the most important thing. Life is the most important thing. And some art, like the ancient Greek art, really was filled to the brim with life. It was vivacious and energetic, and it still chills you to the bone to experience that artwork today. It's full of life. Some art, though, pop music from the 70s, right? Not very full of life. Sort of flat. The same thing is true of religions. So we'll leave today's recording on that sort of cryptic note, that sort of dark but positive note too, right? Religion can be full of life. That's what Nietzsche wants you to have, is religion and art that are full of life. The question is, though, whether the meanings given by the current art you consume and the current religious beliefs you have, whether they enhance your life or whether they're negative about your life and try to demean the life that you already have. Do we have life-affirming art and religion or life-denying art and religion?